Welcome to our continuing series of virtual voices hosted by World Information Transfer and focusing on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Our presenter today is Veronika Mudra, who is a human rights advocate, founder of White Ribbon USA, and chairwoman of White Ribbon Ukraine, promoting gender equality and ending violence against women. She founded AltrEgo, a cybersecurity company. Her experience as a former refugee from Ukraine drives her dedication to support programs for refugees who are victims of domestic violence, providing affordable and affordable housing. Ms. Mudra advocates for legislative reform in the U.S. Congress, particularly the Hague Convention Reform, collaborating with various embassies and organizations. She has established White Ribbon Days in Congress and runs the largest campaign against sexual harassment in the veterans community with the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. She is expanding her White Ribbons campaign globally and has been actively involved in fundraising and humanitarian efforts for Ukraine. Over to you, Ms. Mudra.
Thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you for having me here today. So I would like to start my presentation by saying that I came to the US about 10 years ago as a refugee under domestic violence protection program. And when I came here with my 2-year-old son, we immigrated from Kyiv. At that time in Ukraine, there was no law against domestic violence, meaning domestic violence was not a criminal act. And that enabled us to protect our basic human rights in the Ukraine at that time. So and then 10 years later, I did found organizations that fight against gender-based violence here in the US and in the Ukraine as well. And I want to say that I'm very devastated as a refugee from Ukraine, looking at Ukraine right now, and I really am grateful that we have so many attendees from Ukraine, and I really feel for my country and I really feel for you. But at the same time, I think it's very important to acknowledge the gender-based war crimes, and the subject that we have today, domestic violence, even it's related mostly to the US, partly to Ukraine, but I think it's very important for Ukraine in the situation of war to speak more about gender-based crimes as a type of the war crimes and acknowledge this criminal acts that are happening in Ukraine. So I would like to share my screen, if I may. I would like to speak briefly about what is White Ribbon globally in the US and in Ukraine. So White Ribbon campaign is the largest in the world male initiative against gender-based violence towards women and girls. It was founded in 1991 in Canada, and currently we are active in more than 80 countries across the world. White Ribbon became a symbol of activism against violence towards women and also protection of safe motherhood. We are related to United Nations worldwide initiative, 16 days of activism against gender-based violence that starts annually from November 25th on the White Ribbon Day and ends on December 10 on International Human Rights Day. I personally joined campaign about 10 years ago in 2014. While being in Ukraine, my friend from Poland, Veronika Mudra, founded White Ribbon Ukraine. And she had the first and the largest privately held campaign against gender-based violence called Lubish Nebi. It was technically across Ukraine, across the country, and it was very successful. It was supported by local city governances, and it was a lot of visual educational materials were in Ukraine, in billboards, and even in subways. So I had certain situation myself in Ukraine, and this is how I met Veronika. And I immigrated that time from Ukraine to the US and established White Ribbon USA to protect my rights and the rights of my child. And I also took over the management of the White Ribbon in Ukraine and became a chair of the board there. So this is a brief history how I became connected with this global movement, technically to protect my own rights, first and foremost, and make sure that none of the mothers, none of the women would go through everything that I had to go through. So White Ribbon in Ukraine became very successful, and we started to work with the US Embassy in Ukraine and run joint campaigns, including White Ribbon Days in Verkhovna Rada. We supported criminalization of domestic violence in Ukraine in 2017, 18, and 19. We supported numerous of laws in regards to alimony pays in Ukraine. And also we launched the first in Ukraine mobile app for domestic violence victims called White Ribbon UA. Besides that, in the US, we started to, one second, I want to change the slide. In the US, we started to work closely with US Congress, establishing White Ribbon Days in Congress, recognizing domestic violence survivors and victims. We got support here from the US Department of Veterans Affairs, National Association of Social Workers, American Counseling Association, American Psychological Association, American Association of Marriage and Family Therapy, and American Psychiatric Association, American Psychological Association. So technically all major service providers in the US became affiliated partners of the White Ribbon in the US. And we jointly run in the US, we jointly run White Ribbon VA campaign, which is the largest campaign in the US for veterans against sexual harassments and sexual assaults. We started this campaign back 5 years ago, right before the COVID, and we started with 10,000 veterans participating, and now we have more than 1 million veterans participating in this campaign, and White Ribbon became a part of US Department of VA policies. So every employee, even every C-level employee now in VA taken White Ribbon VA pledge against sexual harassment, sexual assaults, and gender-based violence. So here on this slide, you can see our the photos of keynote speakers from Congress from the annual White Ribbon Days. On the left is Undersecretary of the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, Tanya Bretcher. Next is Congresswoman Debbie Dingell. Next is a Congresswoman Lucy Macbeth. And here is next is the CEO Anthony Eastrid, CEO of the National Association of Social Workers. So here on this slide, you can see some photos from the events with the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs. On the photo on the right, you can see the previous Secretary of the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, everybody wearing the White Ribbon badges. So also we had Miss Rosie. She was Biden's advisor on gender policies and a big supporter of the White Ribbon campaign in the U.S. So technically, in 5 years, this campaign, the White Ribbon VA campaign, became the largest campaign for veterans and people who served in militaries and experienced any types of gender-based discrimination. Let me change. Do you see this slide here?
Yes, we can.
Here is the presentation of White Ribbon Days in parliaments around the world. We see Verkhovna Rada on the left and on the right. We see the members of Ukrainian parliament, Verkhovna Rada, wearing the White Ribbon badges during the annual White Ribbon Days. There, we had a little break because of the war and because of the situation that we experienced with our office in Ukraine due to the war. So we didn't do just 1 year the White Ribbon Days, but I hope that this year we can do the White Ribbon Days in Verkhovna Rada again. In the middle, we see the Speaker of the Parliament of the United Kingdom, since we have one of the largest White Ribbon offices are located in the UK, in Australia, in New Zealand, and of course in the US. And before the war, White Ribbon Ukraine was one of the most active and most fast-growing offices of White Ribbon in the world. So I hope that the war will be finished soon and will be over, and Ukraine will prevail, and White Ribbon will be doing great again in Ukraine. Here is the also some pictures of the White Ribbon Days in the U.S. Embassy in Ukraine. U.S. Ambassador William Taylor and the First Lady of Ukraine, Elena Zelenska, supported the White Ribbon campaign in the Ukraine. And we're very grateful for both U.S. and Ukrainian governments for supporting us there. We also worked closely with National Police of Ukraine. We had a campaign that is called Я захищу, I will protect. And this campaign was mostly done to improve the community communication and community trust, a trust between communities and police as an entity. Because even Ukraine adopted the new law criminalizing domestic violence there. It's still very fresh, and it still needs a lot of work needs to be done to correctly implement the law, implement the new restraining orders, implement the new procedures existing in law enforcement. And traditionally in Ukraine, there was a misinterpretation of the role of police in cases related to domestic violence. It was still historically, it was not common to report domestic violence, and there was a pretty decreased level of trust from communities towards police. But because national police in Ukraine was really very well reformed under support of the Embassy of Canada, and we joined forces with law enforcement in Ukraine and had this amazing campaign. It was running for the whole year a few years ago, and the main idea is the police and law enforcement in Ukraine can be trusted and should be, and all the cases related to gender-based violence should and can be reported to the police. And I hope that our campaign helped in this regards a bit. Also, on the other hand, except the traditional collaborations between White Ribbon campaign and governments around the world, we also work closely with celebrities, with opinion leaders, and influencers. So here you can see a lot of celebrities who support the White Ribbon in the US and in the UK, but also it's relevant to all other countries. So you can see here Paul McCartney, David Beckham, Stella McCartney, Karl Lagerfeld, and I will not name Salma Hayek, Orlando Bloom, I will not name all of them, but Salma Hayek was personally running White Ribbon campaign in the UK for many, many years. And she's a big supporter of the White Ribbon. And also we had one project in the US based on film industry. It's we produced a short film and about refugees under domestic violence in the US. So we utilize the fact that we're based in Los Angeles, California, the capital of entertainment industry in the US, and we have a lot of celebrities supporting this campaign. So we produced a film to visualize one story based on true events of an immigrant from Ukraine who came to the US under domestic violence protection program. So we're very grateful for all our supporters. Also, on the other hand, we had a lot of brand collaborations around the world with major brands, such as Yves Saint Laurent and Stella McCartney's brand, and Kering Group that own a lot of fashion brands, because it's important when when businesses are showing their social responsibility and sustainability for customers. And so technically we did few collections in regards to stop violence against women. And it was a statement that we could see in some ad campaigns supported by brands owned by Kering Foundation. So another interesting fact is, since White Ribbon is the largest in the world male initiative, our campaign is very different from Me Too or Time's Up or traditional women rights campaigns, since we do a lot of work to engage men. All our main founders from Canada are men. Our main founder in the world of the global White Ribbon is Michael Kaufman, who was a professor at the university in Toronto and who now became G7 coach on policies in regards to gender policies. So technically, we engage a lot of men to stand up for women. And in Ukraine, our first ambassador was Andriy Shevchenko. We did an ad campaign with him for White Ribbon back in 2017, and it was very successful. We ran this campaign through all the Ukraine, through many regions, and we have David Beckham, Paul McCartney, Orlando Bloom. We have a lot of influential men supporting this movement. And I think it's very important because technically women don't do domestic violence against each other. And in majority of cases, it's inappropriate male behavior towards women in majority of cases, because gender-based violence is not just about men or women, it's genderless issue. But I speak about majority of cases. So it's important for us to know that a lot of men supporting this campaign, and men actually are really the best speakers and spokespersons for our movement to explain to younger generation of men and boys why domestic violence is not acceptable, and why the tolerance and mutual respect is a good foundation for healthy relations and for healthy attitudes towards women. One more important aspect of our activity is that we launched in Ukraine the mobile application called White Ribbon UA for victims of domestic violence. It was supported by a US embassy in Ukraine about 3 years ago. It's based on the first in Eastern Europe mobile application for domestic violence victims called For You. It was launched in Bulgaria. So we collaborated with this Bulgarian app to modify it and launch it for Ukraine. This app has a self-quiz that helps to people to understand if they are in abusive relations or not, or is just a family conflict, because there is a thin line between a family conflict and domestic abuse. There is also a hotline, like a button for a hotline in Ukraine, for a national police hotline, and also for hotline of La Strada. This is one of the nonprofits, the oldest nonprofits in Ukraine that deals with domestic violence. They have a hotline for domestic violence victims. There are a lot of useful links and information about legislative aspects of domestic abuse and the existing laws in Ukraine. So we hope as soon as the war will be over, we hope to relaunch this app, make it better, stronger, and but it was launched and it was the first in Ukraine mobile app of this kind. The interesting fact is that this app has features like recording of evidences of domestic violence. And we successfully were approved by Apple developers platform, because technically it's illegal to record anyone. I mean, for us, at least being in California, but for Ukraine, with this app has a feature that allows victims to actually record evidences of domestic violence cases and send it immediately directly to your trusted person, whether it's a lawyer or your friend. So you don't need to store this data on your phone, because abusers often check the phones of the victims. And also interesting feature of this app is that it has a hidden layer of security. So if you would open this app, it just looks like women's calendar of women's days, right? So it just looks like a regular calendar for women, and tracking their cycle. And but if you press the ribbon for 3 seconds, then the app turns to actual app for recording the evidences of domestic abuse. So it has a really interesting layer of security. I'm done with this presentation, and now I would like to show you a little video about the White Ribbon VA campaign in the US.
Hello, everybody. My name is Dennis McDonough. I'm the Secretary of the Department of Veterans Affairs. And I'm really grateful that you've joined me here today as we take a very important step to recommit ourselves to the fundamental promise of the Department of Veterans Affairs, which is that we will care for veterans every bit as well as they have cared for us. So what does that mean? At its most fundamental level, it means that when veterans entrust to us the opportunity to care for them, that we assure them that we will respect them, that we will welcome them in all of our facilities, and that we will ensure that they feel safe. Importantly, free from harassment and sexual assault. So that's why we're gathered here together today to repledge ourselves to that commitment to trust, to safety, to respect. And that's what the fundamental pledge is in the White Ribbon Pledge, where we make public to one another this personal commitment that we live every day and that we expect each other to live every day as we serve our veterans. So I ask each of you to raise your right hand and to join me as we restate the White Ribbon Pledge. I pledge to never commit excuse, or stay silent about sexual harassment, sexual assault, or domestic violence against others. Thank you very much. As you see in these great public servants who have joined me here, as they make this pledge, again, this fundamental commitment to trust, they're wearing white shirts and denim as a restatement of a recognition that this crime, which is a fundamental breach of trust, is not something we'll tolerate. We will take every step that we can to protect and underscore our commitment to that safety, security, and trust of our vets. Thank you all so much for joining me today.
Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation, Veronika. I wanted to ask you something. We have been working at the beginning when there was a tremendous amount of rape of the Russian soldiers by for Ukrainian women and girls and even little boys at the beginning of the war. Have you in any way been involved with that, or is that something that is not on your agenda?
It is on our agenda, and the way we decided to help is we decided to support one of the international military battalions called Georgian National Legion in Ukraine, since they were one of the most, and still are, I believe, one of the most effective battalions when it comes to kinetic war and dealing with technically a warfare, because we're in the moment of all the rapes happening in Bucha and in all the occupied cities, right? The murders of kids and the horrible crimes. So the fastest way to help at that point, at the moment of kinetic war and physical actions in Ukraine, just to support a very strong military battalion who are dislocated in these hot zones of the war. So that was step number one. So to target the most effective international military battalion that has both Ukrainian and international soldiers, and just support them. So this is what we've done. We've done fundraising here specifically for them, so they can be more effectively dealing with the Russian soldiers on the ground who actually physically doing all these horrible acts. Then more civilized and more common way to deal with this issue afterwards is, of course, to prosecute, to gather information and prosecute those soldiers who did these awful crimes, and those battalions from the Russian military armed forces who actually had an order to go in and rape the kids and kill women in front of their children. So because of the war, Ukrainian office of the White Ribbon is currently really understaffed. A lot of our employees immigrated to different countries. We're mostly stayed working online. Unfortunately, we have only 2 people on the ground from our office, administrative staff. So we slow down our activity in regards to follow-ups in gathering information that can help to general prosecution services in Ukraine to open the cases and investigate them. But what we keep on doing, we keep on supporting Georgia National Legion already since the beginning of the war, and this is our form of supporting someone who is on the ground and can deal with Russian soldiers on the ground.
Well, I'm very glad. We have done some work with them, basically getting psychologists and people that are working with emotional problems of children and women in there. But we have just done that at the beginning, and then because of the need for arms, we moved our attention to sending missiles. So
yeah, exactly. We had one project also. So when the war hit, we had to really reorganize the whole company, the whole organization in Ukraine, and we temporarily had a temporary management there. They tried to do the psychological therapy master classes for victims of rapes. And they were doing it jointly with other organizations, but a lot of psychologists, professional psychologists, quit this project because some of the clients in this project, the victims of rapes, were as young as 6 years old. So it was one of the most difficult projects I ever experienced. I am in the US, I'm in California, but I mean, it's one of the most difficult projects I came across. And there were a lot of drop-offs from professional psychologists from this project because of the extreme severeness of emotional
trauma.
Stress and trauma even for psychologists. I'm not even speaking about these kids. So a lot of parents, their parents became patients of mental hospitals, mental facilities, because of the enormous trauma received during the PTSD, during the rapes that happened. So so that's why we decided to support soldiers on the ground who can deal with these Russian soldiers immediately while
Well, actually, I'm glad to hear from them. What we have done, we have sent hundreds of cell phones to distribute to the young women that were raped, so that they could at least communicate. And we also found that there was difficult with the psychologists. But one of our partners, Roman Winfield, we have sent a lot of cell phones to distribute to them. So I noticed that, but thank you very much for the update. That was very, very relevant when I talked with the other psychiatrists that I am involved with. Our moderator is here, so over to you, Susie.
Thank you, Dr. Durbach. We received many questions on this important and relevant topic. So one of our audience members is asking, what should be done so that women do not remain silent about incidents of violence? And how can we change social stereotypes that justify violence against women?
It's a question from Ukraine or from the
Yes.
US? Okay. So in Ukraine, that's a long-term game to change the way people think, to change the mentality or attitude towards any social injustice, whether it's racism or domestic violence or discrimination. It takes decades sometimes. So, and the core is in educational and awareness campaigns. And they have the same importance as immediate services given to the victims. But in order for victims even to get to the stage where they feel comfortable going and asking for services, asking for help, those victims have to report their cases to law enforcement. That's why back in 2014, my friend Veronika Mudra, she's Ukrainian living in Poland, who brought White Ribbon to Ukraine, did the first campaign called Lubisz Nebi. It were a lot of big boards with beautiful women, sort of show an example of speaking up about the domestic violence. Back in 2014, when it was completely not relevant because we still had like different issues, more important than probably for the country than domestic violence. Even it sounds bad, but it was a beginning of military conflict in the East. So that subject was not in top of political agenda in Ukraine. Later on, it became more important when Ukraine started to apply and be more considered to be European Union member and to do to adopt the non-visa regime with Schengen zones with European countries. It was one of the standards that Ukraine had to do, or to ratify Istanbul Convention on domestic violence. That did not happen because opposition from the religious organizations. And the second was to adopt the law criminalizing domestic violence. That happened. And our organization was advocating in Verkhovna Rada to support the voting process for this law. So the way women would feel comfortable to report the cases and not staying silent is by government, Ukrainian government, and police and organizations like us working together, creating awareness campaigns, explaining to women that there is a hotline, 611, from what I remember in Ukraine, right? It's 611. It's a sort of 911 for you, 611 for police, right? So there is also a national hotline for domestic violence in Ukraine. There is an app that we created. So just informing women that there are a lot of tools, and patrol police of Ukraine is there to be on their side, that nobody will question them, that nobody will have, will not trust their stories, because the first and foremost is important for victims to know that they are trusted, that whatever they're saying is technically heard by police, and nobody is really judging them. They're there to help to these women. So technically building more trust between communities and police, this is very important. That's why we had a campaign, Я захищу, with police. I know personally great police officers, high-ranked in the Ministry of Internal Affairs in Ukraine, that are really big proponents for programs for domestic violence and for protecting women and children against domestic violence. So I know police was reformed, and it's not perfect, but it's much better than it was. So I think that trust issues that women have in general, that they will be judged or somebody will not believe them, I think that the way to overcome it is to do open public campaigns like we've done, and police doing a lot of like more explanational work, what women can do when they have certain situations, that they should be not ashamed to call to police and report the abuse.
Thank you. And what can we do as society, ordinary citizens, to contribute to the prevention of violence, either in Ukraine or just in general anywhere?
She's Not Your Rehab. It's a very interesting campaign formed by former gang members, and campaign stands against addictions and against violence towards women. And the campaign was founded by men who supported by former gang members, even supported by men who were still in prisons. And it's art-based campaign that had the most, like, men were asked to answer question, who is a woman? And the graffiti artist was drawing the answers on the canvases, and they were selling these canvases during the art exhibitions. And the whole campaign is called She's Not Your Rehab, which I think is very cool. And the concept is amazing. And the fact that, for example, they had a photo shoot in a prison in New Zealand, and the campaign was supported by former gang members who rehabilitated themselves, who had successful treatments against addictions, who understood the importance of speaking up against domestic violence, and they transformed some very negative experience to something very positive and did a campaign out of that. And then they shot a short film, and they did amazing photo shoot in the prisons with men in New Zealand who stand against domestic violence. So how cool is that, right? So I mean, it was done in very specific countries, and I hope to bring this campaign to the US. But I think like this campaign is very creative.
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you for sharing. And yes, I think many of us are familiar with Me Too. Did you find in certain campaigns where there's some controversy around how a lot of it is like he said, she said, and then we're trying to bring light to a problem, but then on the other hand, sometimes there will be false allegations as well. So have you seen ways campaigns have navigated this challenge?
Of course, because that's the thing. With the Me Too, of course, there were some, at some degree, there were cases that were built up on the legacy of other legit cases when technically women were trying to go after very wealthy men.
What legislative reforms in the US do you think are most important to achieving gender equality and ending violence against women? And do you plan to continue working on these reforms?
We do have one reform that we're working on in Congress, and it's already, okay, so it's called the Hague Convention Reform for refugees under domestic violence. So the Hague Convention, for those who don't know, technically it's a good tool to protect children from abduction. But because it was written 42 years ago in Europe, they did not include domestic violence as a definition of a grave risk. So meaning that imagine if a mother from somewhere is escaping with her child to save her life and her baby's life, asking for asylum in a country like Australia, UK, or US, or any other country. An abuser who is a biological father still has a right to claim this kid to be returned back to him to dangerous circumstances. Just because the Hague Convention doesn't see immigration as a form of liberation, but only sees abduction fact, that the kid was removed from one place to another. So what we're advocating for in the Congress and also in Europe and Netherlands is to include in Hague Convention domestic violence as a definition of a grave risk that will keep these refugees, mothers and children safe after they receive asylum. So when in majority of cases, in such cases of immigration, the biological fathers are abusers. So this definition will protect these victims and these kids from being taken back to the abusive biological fathers. So this is a very, it's a bit complicated international law, but US has its own procedures. This reform was already supported by Congress, by bipartisan congressional members that are part of Judicial Committee of Congress. And this reform is now in the hands of DOJ, Department of Justice, who are responsible for this. And we worked closely with Berkeley University on this reform. They analyzed 450 legal cases when children were removed from protective mothers back to abusive fathers. And they proved through this research legally that the Hague Convention as international document has to have domestic violence as a definition. And we shot a short film about it called Reunited. And unfortunately, we don't have time. I would show you a teaser of this film, but I can drop a link, or I can send to Dr. Durbach a link, and then she can share. So you can watch that movie. It's sure it's like 15 minutes. So we produced a short film to visualize this complicated reform and what harm the Hague Convention does staying unreformed for domestic violence refugees. So I think this is important. I hope we can pass this legislation before the elections. I'm not sure, but we're working on it.
Thank you. Are there interesting partnerships and collaborations that White Ribbon has engaged in to further your mission, and any strategies you can share to attract journalists and media attention?
Collaborations, I mean, the slide with like Yves Saint Laurent white sneakers and the Stella McCartney holding the White Ribbon badge, it was done like 2016, 17, 19, I think that's the campaigns. So far in LA, we're trying to collaborate now with artists, with like street artists to have that She's Not Your Rehab campaign in the US, specifically in LA first. So we're trying to now find partners and street artists, like famous ones, to collaborate with under this campaign.
Thank you. And what strategies have you found most effective to attract journalists and media to cover your campaigns and initiatives?
Usually we just have our publicists send in press releases across the country. So and then those media that are interested, they're just picking up and publishing our press releases. But because we're sending press releases about like major events, like something like White Ribbon Day in Congress, and we're always naming the congressional members who supporting us. So this level of news, they often get picked by media. So we can just have our publicists and send in press releases when something interesting is happening.
Do you find and observe changes in public attitudes toward gender equality and women's rights since the founding of your organization? Like, have changes surprised you or given you hope for the future?
I mean, probably it was more noticeable in Ukraine, because when I first tried to contact journalists in 2014 and explain in Ukrainian journalists and explain the case that I have and all the discrimination and all this corruption and all this what I experienced, it was just simply not interesting for them in media in Ukraine at that time. So it was 2013, 14 probably. And then when we launched officially White Ribbon Ukraine, and we started to do campaigns, and we had Andriy Shevchenko, who is the most famous soccer player of all times from Ukraine. And when guys like that started to support us, when like athletes, boxers started to support White Ribbon, it became like cool, even like very cool, to kind of support women's rights and talk about it. So it was just very visible and very feasible results that we saw in Ukraine in very short time, because technically 10 years span is a very short time for a country. So from media not wanted to talk to me, by media coming to us, because we have U.S. Embassy on our side, and we have First Lady on our side, and we have U.S. Ambassador and Andriy Shevchenko and all the stars, athletes supporting us, then it became suddenly very cool to talk about it in a way, you know, like publicly. So that was a big, huge change. And I also saw the law passing in Ukraine so fast, because technically, like, you know, 3 years is a fast for a country who had no law. So that was also really a huge progress that happened.
That's amazing. Thank you. Such impactful work. And the last question to close out, as you look to the future, what kind of plans or aspirations do you have to continue expanding White Ribbon globally, or any other remarks you'd like to close out with?
Yeah, I would like to close with the hopes that Ukraine gonna prevail and win this war very soon, because as you know, we have elections coming, and I don't know if you guys were watching the debates, but I hope that whoever will win will still have Ukraine in its priority and agenda to protect and support us in this war. And we even like me living in the US, all of us, all Ukrainians were heavily impacted by the war. My mom is still in Kyiv, and our office completely, it didn't become dysfunctional, but it was so understaffed that it's so difficult for us to operate. And we want to work in Ukraine. We want to do what we've done before and keep on progressing in that in that field. So I really hope that we can win this war, and our office in Ukraine would be as strong, even stronger than it was before the war started. So this is first and foremost, because opening of white ribbons in different countries is not an issue. We're speaking with Kazakhstan now, with Morocco, with India, who these countries want to join white ribbon. But for me as a Ukrainian, I want to see white ribbon in Ukraine strong as much as I want to see my country win this war and my people in peace and in safe place, not in this horror that is happening now and undefined future.
Thank you. I'll turn to Dr. Durbach to close out.
Thank you very much, Susie, for moderating, and Veronika, thank you for a very, very inspirational presentation, and particularly the reforms in The Hague are very, very positive step. Hopefully they're not going to take too long to have it. And we also wish that Ukraine still maintains at least some electricity and some power so that we can export, and especially our representatives in Ukraine, let the world know what's going on, because that's one of the biggest problems, is that the Russians have been destroying all the electrical power stations, and that is a big problem. And even for our students and listeners who listen to our webinar. So again, thank you very much for all of your work, and we wish you the best of luck in the future. And in the meantime, take good care of yourself and have a very, very nice holiday weekend coming up. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. I appreciate you all. Thank you.